Wonderful to see you all. It's been a while seeing some of you, and I hope that you're all doing well. Hoping that the ice this morning was not too terribly challenging. Hoping as well that in general, everyone has been coping well with these wild and woolly times that we're all facing. And it's really wonderful to be able to get together, at least in this way. Can you all hear me okay? Can you just give me a thumbs up? And okay, very good. So I appreciate your taking some time to spend together. I don't think we're going to go much more than an hour tonight. Let's keep it around that time frame. But what I'd like to do is to do a bit of presenting, and we'll take certain pauses at times that I think might be good for and appropriate for pausing to consider some questions or thoughts. Maybe best to put them into chat, if you don't mind. This is a nice, lovely, large group. And oh my goodness, Julie. Hello, Julie from Florida. Wonderful to be able to see you joining us. We'll do our best to communicate in ways that can promote our being together a bit and to hopefully engage in some Jewish study. I have had myself a very long love affair with this kind of topic. The folks who've tried to make sense out of this whole enterprise we call Judaism in the modern times. And to get us started, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I deliberately didn't use the word philosophy and philosophers as part of this for a couple of reasons. One is that Jews have traditionally conveyed all sorts of thoughts about what Judaism is all about, but didn't do it in classical ways that we kind of associate with other cultures. So if you remember all those wonderful courses you took and continue to take, perhaps, our friends, the Greeks, especially Aristotle, said the way to understand the world is through very, very clearly and systematically going through 4 particular areas. So things like metaphysics. How does the universe work? What does the universe mean? How did it come to be? Things like epistemology, which is just basically, how do we know anything? How do we know that there is such a thing as truth? How do we know there is something true when we encounter it? And what are the best ways for us to be able to deal with it and to define it in the first place? And even, is there any such thing as truth to begin with? Then there is politics. How should we organize ourselves into a society for everyone's best interests? That being the case, of course, there's never any controversy or challenge with that or disagreement. That's a very ripe one for everybody these days. And it's still an ongoing challenge. And then ethics. What constitutes good? What constitutes evil or wrong? How do we define it? Who has the authority to determine what is good? What is the role of religion and other elements within society to tell us what's good? So we have people who've done that, but for the most part, if you go back to the Bible, if you go back to the Talmud, up until that time frame, you didn't get people who were systematically writing philosophical works saying, here is point by point by point my proofs for this statement. You have to wait for that until you get to people like Sadia Gaon and especially Maimonides in the Middle Ages. But that doesn't mean we didn't have ideas and values coming out of the Torah. How do we know that life is precious? Our sages would tell us because everybody's created in God's image. How do we know that we're supposed to be a special community? Because we have the story of Sinai. How do we know that we're not supposed to be engulfed by hate? Because we have a commandment, don't abhor the Egyptian. How do we know that monotheism is important? We have stories, we have legends, we have all sorts of things. They're just not necessarily logical statements. That comes later on in life. But what do we do with a situation when we come to modernity, when everything is up for grabs, when everything begins to change? So I'd like to start with a bit of a thought experiment, and you can jot it down to yourselves or think about it, or if you're with somebody else, you could chat about it a little bit if you like. Imagine you're meeting somebody who just has never had contact with Jews or Judaism. And they ask you the question, well, what is it that makes you a Jew? And how do you go about deciding how you're going to live the kind of life that you want to do with respect to this experience we call Judaism and the Jewish people? And how does that relate to other experiences you might have. For example, being an American. How do those two work together? Or how do they not work together? And what I'm really trying to get at is that we have a really very firm notion in our lives of something we call identity. We hear all the time in our conversations, from Pew reports, from everything, how do we measure Jewish identity? Other identities too, to be sure. Does identification get out of hand sometimes? Is it overly imposing upon us? In pre-modern times, people didn't talk that way. It wasn't an issue. There wasn't a sense of, oh, I am doing this because I am enhancing or trying to express my Jewish identity. You did something because it was a core part of everything about you and your experience. It doesn't mean that there weren't renegades, that there weren't people who said, this Jewish stuff isn't for me. But it wasn't a conscious effort to say, in as far as we can basically tell, this is what life is all about. And I am finding my way in throughout my steps through life, in part because I identify as a Jew. And that can have, of course, more than one meaning. It can have many, many meanings. So if you find yourself thinking about yourself as having a Jewish identity, if you find yourself thinking that there are many ways of expressing that identity, and the freedom to do so is something very special and precious, if you find yourself thinking that there's nothing much more important than the freedom to choose at any given time which way I will identify as a Jew, and if you find yourself believing that what I am going to do religiously or in other Jewish expressions, because for the most part, I feel it is meaningful to me. If you find yourselves agreeing with any of those statements, no, we don't have a door prize, but what we do have is a way of tracing that back a little bit. And for our precursors, those who've come to our attention in the course of our recent history, they set the stage for these kinds of considerations that your friends and my friends and your great, 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 great grandparents and mine in the ghettos of Europe would have no way of imagining the world being, because it just didn't really exist. So I am not an historian. I am not an expert in every measure of the philosophical figures we're going to be talking about, but I am enraptured in a way by their story, the story of their lives in many instances that are really very compelling biographies, and the ways in which they have helped to shape our world today. So let's see if we can actually make this work. Tim Cook was busy tonight, so tonight's keynote presentation is largely due to the skills of Nancy Rosen, whom I think for this and countless other things. So let's see if we can make this happen. Okay. You can see this, I hope? Okay, that is wonderful. And let me get rid of this. Okay, so here is the compulsory statement of what we're doing, as well as a picture that, of course.
Rabbi, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but if you could hit play on that for all of us. Right on the triangle. Oh, you almost had it.
I got to get rid of this top screen here. I can't get to it for the time being.
Okay, forget it. Never mind. This is perfect.
Triangle. What triangle are we talking about?
No, right on the play button, right? You can see the word play, but I guess that Zoom window has you locked down. Never mind. You're doing great. Never mind.
Okay, just I want to be able to go through the slides though. Hopefully that will work. Okay, so we have Rodin the thinker. And to be sure, Jews have pondered very, very deeply the meaning of our religion and the meaning of finding ourselves in a society that very often does not share those kinds of values and has varied in its relationship to us from toleration to acceptance, sadly, to the very polar opposites, which really very much are the experiences of hatred, anti-Semitism, as we know, and sometimes in very, very violent and genocidal forms. That's not news to any of us. But what I'd like to be able to do, because this is not going to work here, so I want to be able to get to these other slides, because we worked really hard on those slides. Lydia, anything I can do to get rid of this upper box here?
You could hit escape. Let's try that. Oh, Nancy coming in for the win.
Okay.
What did you do? Tim, what'd you do?
Perfect. Okay, that theoretically should do it.
I don't know how to.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, Nancy. All right, so here are the folks I propose that we look at. I don't know how many of them are familiar to you. And I call it a taste of the greats because this is a broad and necessarily brief survey, because I'd like us to be able to get a feel for kind of the panorama of what has been and who have been the shaping forces in the situations that we find ourselves today. This is by definition a very, very partial list. And it is exclusive of various individuals, for example, from the Sephardic world. It is exclusive of Israelis in terms of more modern times. Not that there are not significant contributions to be found there, but this is just more of a European-based and American-based kind of dynamic for now. But there is certainly a part two to be had here. And you may notice that it is unfortunately almost close to being exclusively men, with one exception, and that is number 5. Tikva Frymer-Kensky, who sadly died at a very young age, was a pioneer in Jewish thought, especially in feminist Jewish thinking. And I have asked, when we get to the section that will address her thought, which is very magnificent and very beautiful, to have Rabbi Zarin come to be our guest and collegial participant here, because she has more background in her thought, from her thought than I do. And I thought that that would be appropriate. And we may make a little change. And Solomon Schechter, we may throw in Mordechai Kaplan, because he has been very, very influential as well. So we have a story to tell. And the story goes something like this. There were various things that took place in modernity that changed everything. The genie came out of the bottle. If you think about what Jewish life largely was, and forgive the overgeneralization, in the Middle Ages, it was Jews largely committed to very significant restrictions, sometimes with an easing up and sometimes with levels of restrictions. But Jews were not allowed free movement to do whatever they wanted to do. Yes, economically, they were often sought after because of having international relationships with fellow Jews and for other reasons. But within a particular locality, very often they were limited in what they could do, and they certainly did not have what we would call full citizenship. There are those who labored mightily to end that reality and to be able to create something that was very, very different, in accordance with what we come to understand today as being a given. Of course, American Jews can vote for all sorts of offices. The only question is, what will be the trends in which American Jews will vote? We don't even give it a second thought. But it's hard to imagine. But there was a time, of course, when that any kind of recognition that somebody was a full-fledged German or a member of French society, or you can name certainly Russia, that would have been laughable almost in pre-modern times. So there was, if not actual physical ghettos much of the time, a lot of restrictions that came to be fairly close to that. Haskalah, a mirror of the larger Enlightenment world of Europe. This is an intellectual movement that said, in essence, Jews, we want to get you out of intellectual ghettos. You have been, for the majority of your lives in history, a people that has been involved in a very narrow focus on especially the Talmud of Jewish law and related matters. And you know nothing of the broader world, or very little of the broader world. You can't even speak the language of the land, at least not very well. Come and learn as a means of extra freedom for you, extra respect for your surrounding neighbors. come to understand that modern secular values are not your enemy. They can enhance and contribute to your understanding of yourself as a Jew, and also make you more welcome in the host societies that you will find yourselves in. And this is a very important kind of thing, because it deliberately shifted the focus of Jewish learning and study in many ways away from the Talmud to the Bible, because the Bible was the inheritance of everybody, not just the Jewish world. It shifted away from Yiddish and moved it more to Hebrew, and in Germany to German, because Yiddish had this almost kind of parochial, and some very much thought of it almost as a vulgar language compared to the more pure language of German, and of course other countries having their own language. And basically what it said was, in the secular world, yes, it is a good thing to separate religion from state. And it is good to elevate this unifying force of reason in human affairs, because people are naturally, or we'll put that in quotations, moved by rational argumentation for the way they ought to behave, and can accept others across lines if they see, my goodness, you're a human being just like you, just like I am. You may be, or my neighbor may be a German of the Lutheran persuasion, but here's my friend down the street who is a German of the Judaic or Hebrew persuasion. And that was deemed to be a very positive step forward. And in the salons, the gathering places of Europe, to have intellectual conversation and give and take of people who could say, oh, is that how you see things? We see things a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, we are all just good old-fashioned Germans or French people or what have you. That was the ideal. Now, to be accepted, to be a part of the broader culture was one avenue, but one of the other expressions was nationalism. And of course, we all know that this was to be, and is today, a very, very controversial and powerful force that people are talking about all the time. But it's important to remember there was no Germany and no Italy before the end of the 19th century. There were Germanic states, there were Italian states. But when things start to coalesce around a nation state, a broader set of territories with a common set of values and history and of shared destiny, then that becomes a rallying cry. For Jews, this took the form of Zionism, political Zionism, religious Zionism, and other forms. It too would be a way of encountering modernity. Okay, let me see if I can pause here for a second. I can't get to the chat because my cursor, oh, here we go. Take a moment to end your chat things. Oh, we have greetings. Okay. Assimilation did not do much for German Jews or most of European Jewry. That's the point in many respects. The issue, oops, we're going to come to him in a minute. I guess we're there now. I will go back. The issue with are you seeing the chat too? I'm going to get rid of the chat here. Okay, hopefully that'll disappear on us. The key thing that is important here is that this was the desired goal. People in that era truly, truly believed that it would be very, very possible to become a society in which Jews could be fully accepted. And it was a shock when that didn't happen. It didn't do much good for Jews in Germany. It wound up to be very problematic in France. And when it comes to the societal movements, emancipation was very much 2 steps forward and sometimes 3 steps backwards. It didn't happen all at once. And arguably, in some cases, it didn't happen until after World War II. Some would say it's not even complete today. Okay, so let's see if we can go forward. Okay, here we go. Are you able to see the picture? Are you seeing the chat screen too? Okay, Moses Mendelssohn. We'll do the best we can here. Moses Mendelssohn is the first person that we're going to try to spend a little time with. Who was he? He was a very learned man in his own right in a variety of ways. And he lived to live only for a fairly young age. He died before the age of 60, but was the first modern Jew, considered that way by many, many a person. He really believed that there could be a synthesis between Judaism and the broader culture. He continued to be an observant Jew throughout his life, even to the point when he would be involved in some activity with other individuals. He would say, sorry, the Sabbath is almost here. I have to stop my work now. He was one who served as the model of Lessing's Nathan the Wise, somebody who was seen as a particularly appropriate and positive Jewish role model for broader Germans to understand and to appreciate. And what he wanted to do was to spread the idea and constantly promote it in his writings, in his dealings with authorities, the idea of Jews becoming a integral part of German society, to free them from all of the restrictions that took place. And he had as his own particular kind of goal, three kinds of things, and then we're going to see some of his beliefs further in progress, that he wanted Jews to become fluent in German. How did he do that? Not only in his writings, but he took the Hebrew Bible and translated it into a very elegant German. He believed that Jews would never be fully accepted into society until they were able to be fluent in German. That was one of his concerns. He wanted Hebrew to be a modern language, and to that end, wrote in constant journals, and he preferred it constantly over Yiddish. And he wanted people, Jews in particular, to have a well-rounded educational system. He wanted Jews to learn math and the sciences and European literature and all of the other things so they could be an integral part of the world around them. He was very convinced that this synthesis would work. And how did he argue for it? Some representative thoughts here. And mine is covered up. I hope yours isn't, but my cursor doesn't want to participate here, but we'll do our best. Let's start with the second and the third, okay? In fact, let's start with the third. Adopt the mores and the constitution of the country in which you find yourself, but be steadfast in upholding the religion of the state. Has, and I can't see it because I'm being covered up here, has physical power and uses it when necessary, but religion should be all about love and beneficence. Now, we take that as largely a kind of given, that religion is more of a private matter, and it shouldn't be overly politicized, if at all. It shouldn't be something that should be used to torment, to degrade, to put down others. But religion throughout much of history has had a tremendous political basis throughout all sorts of ages. And it extends even to this day, of course. I mean, many of us will be thinking maybe of the Vatican, of other societies in which religion is very powerful. There's a move in modern Israel to get rid of the chief rabbinate because it's seen as a relic of the British system in which there were chief members of the church. The Church of England was, officially upheld as a religion of the country as a whole. There was a chief rabbi of the British Empire, which we still have today, interestingly. But others are saying too much meddling of politics in religion. Mendelssohn really believed this could work. It could make it possible for Jews to be, as Olive Dalla Gordon would later put it, and I think it's an echo of that, and he put it this way: be a Jew in your home and a man in the street. They have elements of that. You can be a part of that broader society. Don't neglect your faith. Don't neglect your responsibilities, but look at the broader picture too. Now, Mendelssohn believed that law, the commandments, Jewish experiences of the Bible were divinely ordained, were divinely inspired, but all other elements beyond the commandments were very largely things that any religion could share if it was based on reason. Reason would be celebrated as the great gift, if you will, of the society that everybody could then come together and celebrate. Did Mendelssohn succeed? Well, it's not just the history that many of you have pointed out. Mendelssohn had 6 kids. There's a little bit of disagreement about this, but only one of them died as a Jew. His chief protege, David Friedlander, converted to Christianity. It's as if Mendelssohn seemed to make a bet that didn't pan out. It just didn't pan out. So that being the case, we have to see where that journey went thereafter. But again, now that there was the possibility, as time would go on, for Jews to encounter, because things did open up in many ways, the broader world, and Jews saw how there was a tremendous amount of opening up to those who understood and adopted the Christian mores of the surrounding culture, it was going to be a very, very interesting challenge. Could Jews and Judaism exist outside of the ghetto? That, I think, was very much the challenge. So again, this is a taste. This is not meant to be exhaustive, though I wish we had time to do more of them. I want to go on to a very favorite character of mine, figure of mine, Franz Rosenzweig. This is a picture taken of him as a younger man. And I think it was a complimentary picture. Rosenzweig lived personally, German Jew, a remarkable and powerful life. His biography of who he was and what he did is testimony to what is possible in a human life. And what he basically was all about was being one of those Germans who sought to be at home, believed he could be at home in Germany if, well, as others within his circle did, one converted to Christianity. That was the ticket to acceptance. It was the ticket to economic advancement. And, you know, it's a remarkable thing. If somebody wants to have advancement in America today, there's no need to convert to Christianity. If one wants to assimilate or to deny Jewishness, there's no need to formally adopt another religion. We have a free marketplace of ideas. We have a very wide open society, a very secular society. You come and go as you wish. No one needs to even know what background you have or what ideas you profess. But in those days, and in Europe, especially in Germany at that time, the ticket was to convert outside of Judaism to Christianity. He was on his way to doing just that. This is one of the most often told stories about him. There's a second one we'll get to in a moment, too. In 1913, he was about to leave Judaism and was all set to become a Christian. And he decided he was going to give Judaism a swan song. So what did he say? He said that in particular, he was going to give it his last hurrah in the autumn of 1913. He was going to go to Rosh Hashanah in his local synagogue. He did. It was miserable. He didn't like it. He said, okay, now I know I'm really on the right track. And then he said to his mother, I'm going to go to Yom Kippur in my local synagogue here. And when doing so, his mother said, no, if that means you're just going to do this before you convert, I don't want you to do that. He wound up going to a small synagogue, a small Orthodox synagogue in Berlin for Yom Kippur. Something happened there. Something stirred within him, as saying, I not only cannot leave this faith, I need to become a more devoted and passionate adherent of it. So he began to study, and he taught himself Hebrew, he taught himself Aramaic, he began to learn the Bible, he began to learn the Talmud. It was a remarkable kind of thing. In 1914, he enlisted in the German army, and he fought. And he said this, Nothing I saw in war was as overwhelming as all of the torment I felt prior to that year in 1913 when I was trying to figure out where to go between Judaism and Christianity. That's a pretty powerful statement. And not only did he stay within that realm of learning, he became a very, very prolific writer. He wrote a very complex and a very influential work called The Star of Redemption. But after he wrote that work, and I'm not going to go into its details right now, he said, that's enough writing for me for now. I need to become an educator. I need to see what I can do in order to influence the Jewish world around me. And I want to have a message to other Jews like me, assimilated Jews, who want to figure out what is the way forward. So he created the Lehrhaus, a study program in which he encouraged all of his students to have a personal encounter with the texts. Now, I'll come back to that, but I want to just end his biography. He only was able to lead that for about 3 years after he established it. He began to feel ill. In 1921, he began to experience full paralysis and ultimately was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Many of us have had experience of that, and it's a terrible, terrible disease. But it didn't stop him from producing. And as he went on, he would, with the assistance of his wife, Edith, would use his eyes to kind of look at and wink at the letters on the typewriter, indicating which button to push in order to get a letter out. You know how painstaking it is to write that way? It's unimaginable. And still he wrote. And he wanted to be able to be an activist because he saw, as wonderful as emancipation may have been, when it allowed for Jews to experience greater political freedom, it also led, he believed, to a reduction in Jewish life. It led to less participation. And what did he want to do in order to counter that? Talk about accomplishments. He began to cooperate with our next person on our list today, which is Martin Buber. And he translated with Buber, so Buber had to finish the work, the Bible into German. And he did it in a way that was very compelling. He didn't try to gloss over the challenges of biblical writing. And to go from having no background to being able to do this is an absolutely remarkable feat. Remarkable feat. And he had the polar opposite goal of Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn translated the Bible into German so that Jews would learn German. Rosenzweig translated the Bible into German with Buber in order so that Jews would have a ticket to learning Hebrew because they didn't know it as much anymore. The total opposite approach. And the other thing that's worth responding to is just this kind of basic school of thought in which Rosenzweig found himself. Rosenzweig was what we call a religious existentialist. He believed that what was important was to be able to pursue with total personal freedom the experience of religious messaging and of its texts and its demands, its commitments, and to do so on a personal basis, but to be responsible about it. That, in other words, once you make your choice, you must commit to it. And even if it's coming from within you, you have the duty to do so. To give you a more modern example, secular existentialists during the Vietnam era very often decried what those who refused to go to the draft did by going to Canada or by leaving the country. They said the truly courageous and existentialist thing to do would be to go to jail. You stand up for your beliefs. You don't just run away from it. You fly off the edge of the cliff if you have to, in order to stake your entire life on the basis of what you believe. So they took that sense of responsibility very seriously, at the same time embracing the idea of individual freedom. Let's see if we can see some of his ideas. Now, this is one of the most important kinds of things that he had to say. What happened at Mount Sinai? What happened at Sinai? it's been a mystery from day one because the Torah itself is a little bit, not a little bit, it's very vague about what happens at that time. And as a result of all of that, it's very significant to see that the Torah itself does not make an exact claim that all of the commandments were given precisely at that moment when Moses stood at Mount Sinai and everything was handed to him on the 2 tablets. It became a pillar of rabbinic belief that the entirety of the written law, as well as the oral tradition, came from God at Sinai. And they had various reasons to have to harmonize contradictions, right? The book of Exodus, for example, says you need to see that your behavior goes on to the next generations, and those who don't hearken to the covenant, God will visit that iniquity onto the future generations. Deuteronomy says, nope, doesn't work that way. Everybody stands for his own kinds of sins and responsible for their own behaviors. It doesn't get passed on through the generations, the DNA. How can both be right? So his contribution to belief was what God revealed at Sinai was the divine presence. The content of what was there was recorded by human beings. Human beings are fallible. Human beings in different generations will have different kinds of statements, understandings. We have to allow for that. But the divinity of Torah comes from the fact that God revealed the divine self at Sinai, and he would say at other times. So what do you do with all of this? Law, and he would write it as gazettes, and this in his builder's work, must always accompany gebot. In other words, he made a distinction between law and commandment. How do you know what you ought to do as a Jew? You do what you feel is personally commanded to you at the moment it is heard. In other words, if it resonates with you, then you do it. Susan asked about the question, did the Star of Redemption contribute to Reform Judaism? I would say that the continuity of his thought did more so than that particular work, because one of the hallmarks of Reform Judaism was the ideal that one studied the entirety of tradition as much as one could, and then made personal decisions on the basis of personal autonomy as to what one ought to do as a statement of personal meaning. That became a very, very valued idea in Reform Judaism. In other words, you're not sure what you want to do about Passover. You read 5 books about Passover, and then you say, this is what I'm going to do. These are the foods I'm going to be concerned about. These are the issues I'm not going to be concerned about. And this is the kind of Seder I'm going to create. Personal meaning was paramount in that. So what he does, and this is, I think, a really, really very interesting, this is quoted almost as much, this last passage here, as the passage that speaks to the ideal of what took place with his conversion, or lack thereof. We look at the book of Exodus, chapter 24, verse 7. Moses takes the book of the covenant, he reads it to the people, they respond, all that God has spoken, we will do and obey. Literally, we will do and then we will hear. We will hear. Na'aseh v'nishma. And what's the traditional understanding of that? That what is involved with that really truly is the idea that there are things you're not going to understand. There are things that may be difficult, that might be challenging, but Israel was so enthusiastic back in the wilderness of Sinai to do the entirety of what God revealed that they said, in literal understandings, we'll do it and then we'll learn the details. And maybe they would add, because it was a nice Jewish group, hopefully they won't be too onerous. We'll do, and then we'll come to understand the details. Behavior preceding understanding on some level, perhaps. Deed before creed, as we say. So Rosenzweig goes the other way, but this is a really powerful basis for our modern times. And I love the way this is posed. And I actually came across a glowing statement of this on a Chabad site today, right? To Rosenzweig. Do you put on tefillin? Do you wrap straps in the morning around your arms that contain little parchments that contain words from the Torah, which is traditional garb in traditional Jewish societies, including ours, right, at our congregation, in the morning? We include women in that if they would like. The ancient world did not, the medieval world didn't either. Do you put on tefillin? And he doesn't say no. And he doesn't say, of course I do, because it's a commandment. It's not yet. He leaves the door open. And that, if you think about it, is very much a part of how so many of us approach things. How often have we pursued something Jewishly? I work a lot of time with people who are Jews by choice, candidates for conversion. They always have very, very rich stories. And I can tell when I'm talking to them about certain practices that are different, they're unusual. They want to take it on, but it's foreboding a little bit. It's a little bit hard to imagine doing it. This is kind of what they're saying. I'm prepared to do it, but I'm not quite there yet. And other kinds of folks do the same thing. I don't know if I'm quite able to embrace this yet. I think I want to, but I have to get comfortable with it. Okay. And the last statement about Rosenzweig that I'll make is that he revolutionized in many ways how we think about learning and education. If you listen to many, if not most of the talks that I happen to give, Rabbi Zarin gives, many of our rabbis, you go across the region, the country. Here's a little quiz. First of all, I guess it's going to force you or maybe encourage you to listen to sermons more often. I hope that that's not in any way too burdensome. But there was always a classical way to begin a drash, a sermon. It would be something along the lines of, in this week's Torah portion, we find something mysterious. In this week's portion, we find something that is encouraging and enlightening that everybody would do well to understand. But we don't do that because, consciously or not, we are Rosenzweigian in one measure. We, American Jews as a whole, have far greater familiarity with the world around us than we might have with Torah. It's just our stomping grounds. We just know the world. And if anything, the internet and social media has made that all the more so, all the more so. And as a result of all of that, he suggested that what you do today to teach is that you have to bring modernity. You have to put life first as people experience it, and then bring it into tradition. And that's the way people will have a better chance of understanding how they might understand their tradition in light of what's going on in the world at large. So just a very simple example, the impetus of the Texas law on abortion is an impetus for a lot of people to say, well, what does my religion say about abortion? What does our tradition say about it? It's a very straightforward kind of example. We could multiply that 1,000 times in terms of modern issues and in terms of life as a whole. Put life first and then relate it to society. Now, Rosenzweig is still very, very much within the Jewish world. He wanted very, very much for Jews to overcome the sense of it's all or nothing, that you can have expressions that are very much a part of life. It has to be, though, something that has integrity and on the basis of personal involvement and meaning, which we all celebrate today. Okay, I'm going to touch on the last one very briefly because I want to leave a little time. I really wish we were in the community room together, folks. This would be so much more fun. I would love to be able to hear all of your thoughts in real time as to what you're thinking and what's maybe not clear, or an alternative explanation to things, because there are many different explanations. Martin Buber, if you can, I can only see his beard, so I hope you can see more of his face than I can. Martin Buber was and remains to this day a really remarkable figure, and is one of the most studied around the world, not just in terms of the experience of the Jewish world. He made the first 60 years of his life, he lived in Europe and Germany. The last years of his life, beginning in 1938, he made his way to the land of Israel, Free State, still Palestine at the time. He came from a family of Jewish scholars. He came with great knowledge and wrote voluminously about the Bible, about philosophy, about Zionism, about much more. He is very well known for his work on Hasidism. He brought the world of Hasidism to the attention of modern Jews and the world at large in ways that are almost unparalleled. And what he loved about Hasidism was that it created a special sense of living Torah, of living in a very vibrant and personal way, how to encounter the spirit of God, the spirit of life in the experience of Torah as a whole. And sorry, yeah, get rid of the box, please. Yeah, my cursor has really disappeared. So the issue of what Buber had to contribute was really a very staunch humanism, elevation of the person. And the way in which this could be done would be to celebrate human potential, human capacity. I almost think sometimes that is a precursor to modern psychological humanism, Rogers and others, right? He loved the idea, you yourself must begin, you have it within you to become capable of making holy everything around you. And he also contributed to a tremendous amount of Arab-Israeli dialogue and was especially willing to, and got very much into hot water over, trying to promote some elements of German-Jewish dialogue because he really believed that reconciliation was the necessary move forward and had to, at the end of the day, be the path forward, even with all of the agony of the Holocaust. So what was Buber's main thinking? This is, by the way, the kind of thing that if we had to take a poll, I bet that this kind of book would rank in the top 10, or this idea that I'm about to show you, in the top 10 of dorm room all-night bull sessions that would take place in colleges around the country, people searching for a sense of what religion could be all about and what God is all about and everything else along those lines. So what does he say? Every person born has something new within them, something that never existed before. The uncompromising magnificence of every human being. Okay? And his belief was all real living is meeting. It is in the encounter with another person that we come to discern not only the humanity of the other person, but rather God. And this is going to be a very brief cursory mention of this. His most well-known work, I believe, is a book called I and Thou. It's been translated. There's a Kaufman translation. There are a bunch of translations. I urge you to read it. I urge you, it's not a very long book. I just urge you to take 5 years to read it if you have to, because it's very dense. It's very dense. And it's remarkable that it's so popular. It's one of the best-selling books, Jewish books, of all time. And I think there's a reason why. Basically, for Buber, most of our relationships are what he would call I, it. I don't know who's on the other side of that Amazon screen when I order, I don't know, paper towels. I just know that some unnamed person out in a warehouse someplace is going to put it together as my part of my order, and some other person, a bunch of people along the way will push it along the way, and then somebody will put it on my doorstep. They're a bunch of its to us. We don't know, we may not even care about them. We just want our paper towels. But he says that's not the way we encounter the world at its best. That's not the way we encounter God. I and thou. When we encounter another person, not superficial conversation, deep appreciation, deep meeting with that other individual, that is when God is brought into the equation. that is when God exists. And when he says to speak the basic word I, thou to him, I take that as meaning that basically to encounter the other in the fullness of that person's humanity, that's when God is present. What's the religious jump from this? God is the eternal thou. The eternal thou. We come to encounter God in relationships, in nature, and in the Bible. That's why he carried on and worked with Rosenzweig when he could for the translation of the Bible into German. And he wanted people to have access to it. He wanted people to see the power of it, that God could be seen in the pages of the Talmud, of the Bible. Now, there's one challenge that was levied against Buber, and basically it was, is this a Jewish idea? Does this really help people be more Jewish? And he says that really what I'm offering is a universal kind of philosophy, because people will be able to use this in all sorts of different ways. It was through his biography, by specifically being in the state of Israel, or the land of Israel before that, and his sense of identification with the land and the people and the developing society there, and his knowledge and his Hebraic expressions. That was important. But he wanted also to be, he was more radical than Rosenzweig. Not only did he believe that you should not adopt a commandment unless it spoke to you, he thought it was actually a bad thing to do if you did. And there are all sorts of interesting stories told about him, going into a religious neighborhood and yelling out to his wife, basically along the lines of, honey, did you buy the pork today? Just to kind of do a little bit of a zetz in terms of others. He firmly believed it was possible that a human being could encounter God, but it had to be something that through exploration and through genuine openness, one could encounter that way. So we've come a little bit of a full circle in a way, if you think about it. We began with big things happening in the world, with Jews knocking on the doors to get out of the ghetto, with movements to say, open yourself up to the world at large, learn the basic ideals of what's taking place in the broader society, to ways of saying, you count as a person, your conscience counts. And theology could be revisited, and it's going to be revisited over and over again. But there's still a path to meaning. The question is, will it work? This basic formula of getting out, of trying to synthesize, would be the path that many other thinkers would try to take, but they would express it very differently. But these are, in my mind at least, some of the forerunners that have helped to make our basic approach and our basic assumptions what they are today. Others will hopefully add to the texture of that. And I am really, really curious to think about, or hear about rather, what you have to say about what this all means. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm afraid to touch any more buttons, but let's see. So I'm just going to read a couple of things here, and if others have thoughts, we'll touch upon this. So Roseanne asked an interesting question. If we use technology as the source of learning and inspiration, entertainment, and we make relating to people as a fundamental thing, do we fear that Buber's philosophy, the next generation, will lose a religious identity and a sense of humanism? I think that the humanistic piece could still be there if people are fundamentally still prepared to see kindness and ideals of mercy and justice and compassion as being core parts of what a human being is all about. What I am less certain of is a Buberian kind of recipe for people being uniquely Jewish. Because at the end of the day, I don't know that one has to know Hebrew and be able to light Shabbat candles in order to be in dialogue with people. So I think that his hopes for that might have been a little bit overdrawn. But in any event, it remains to be seen. Buber has made Judaism and religion very, very accessible to many people. And he did open up Hasidism to a great number of individuals who otherwise would have just thought of it as some kind of a fringe, bizarre, and exotic sect. he showed that it was much deeper than that, especially at its beginning points, because Hasidism, when it began, was far more loose when it came to religious practices and law in favor of spirit, in favor of expression and dance and song. It's now changed quite a bit as a whole. Any other thoughts? Okay, so will you all do me a favor? I'm going to stop. I can't stop sharing because I can't move my cursor up there. Oh, okay, the cursor disappeared. Nope, no, I don't even see you. Take care, everybody. If you can still hear me and see me, I'll see you next week.